All right. We are back again. Few more chapters. And yeah, glad to have you here.
Appreciate it. Yeah, it looks like I'm hoping we get a couple more people in here. It seems like you and I are the only ones left.
Only ones left. Yes, they keep on bailing on us.
Yeah.
Well, anyway, we'll see what happens. I think Mark was traveling this week, so
Mm.
maybe he won't be able to make it. But we don't need him. We could do this ourselves, right?
All right.
Okay, we're starting off with chapter 71. And if you remember, at the last end of the last chapter, they had seen sails off on the horizon, and they were going to go have another gam. And this is an encounter with the Jeroboam, um, another interesting biblical name here. Jeroboam has a plague going on board the ship, and here's another really another one of these crazy little details here. Apparently, that there was somebody on the town ho who we heard about like 20 chapters ago who ended up on the Jeroboam somehow, and we're just now learning about that. Um, so that's really interesting, the way we're taking over there. And then there's a sailor from a Shaker sect who signed on with the Jeroboam in Nantucket named Gabriel, or at least that's what he says his name is. And after a few months on the Jeroboam, announces that he is in fact the Archangel Gabriel, who is here to potentially bring out the end of the world. And apparently, sailors, being a superstitious sort, take this guy seriously, and he's got real charisma when he's trying to convince people of this. So the captain's kind of stuck with this guy who only works when he kind of feels like it. So they catch sight of Moby Dick, and Gabriel tells the captain, "You shouldn't go after Moby Dick here. It's unsafe." And the first mate goes after Moby Dick anyway. And out of everybody on the whaling ship, um, only the first mate gets taken out. I think by Moby Dick's tail, and the whole rest of the crew is on the boat is spared. And so they take this as a sign of divine judgment here. Um, and as it turns out, the Pequod had come with a letter written to the first mate who had died uh, from his wife, now widow. Uh, so we just have this strange little incident here. Anything in that chapter that you think I should have mentioned, Castle?
As far as the recap, I don't think so. I think just check it, and then just the fact that they just so happen to have mail for the people on that ship. Of all places, just kind of circumventing
You could
the rules
imagine, though.
they've been
You could
told.
imagine somebody sending a letter with every whaling vessel that goes out from
If you have
Nantucket.
multiple copies, yeah, I could see that.
Yeah, so you just, oh, this whaling vessel's going out. I'm gonna write a letter. We'll see if it with an update of the news. We'll see if it makes it. And then I think they pretty straightforwardly say that most of them don't end up getting delivered, but
Yeah,
you know, on the
play the
offhand chance
numbers.
that it does, yeah, you may as
Yeah.
well.
Yeah, I mean that's a really good point. I was kind of thinking, someone who does a one and done letter, and then it's just like, well, we'll see if this lands within the next 3 to 5 years. It's just like I don't know. But yeah, if you made a whole bunch of copies, that makes a lot more sense. You just send them off like giant pigeons.
Wasn't what I was thinking.
That's
Yeah, so we've got this we've got like it's not quite a parallel story with the Pequod, but it is somewhat similar in that you've got this charismatic figure who kind of usurps the proper command of the vessel.
mm,
But this time telling people to stay away from Moby Dick rather than going towards him.
yeah. It's an interesting thing. So in the second page of this chapter here, it talks about that they didn't have the I forget what the name of kind of like the parlay that they have is. They had like a specific word for it. but that they don't actually have the captains go from one ship over to another, and they say because a malignant epidemic was on board, and then it says though himself and the boat's crew remained untainted. So it doesn't actually say like what it actually is, if it was, like a
Oh.
what, or it seems like it was like a psychogenic epidemic, like something,
Mhm.
related to hysteria, which of course, if these people are already riled up and have been for like who knows how long by this guy
Mhm.
claiming to be Gabriel, it's like, yeah, there is something interesting about that. Like thinking about throughout history, a lot of these like little towns that have some sort of psychogenic epidemic, and then like something happens, and all of a sudden everybody's fine. And it's just like, oh, that's interesting. Like no one actually ate something bad, or there's nothing in the water, you know. And but yeah, I found that really interesting. This aspect of like the usurpation. So yesterday in our book club, we were kind of talking a little bit about the this aspect of a person who has a lower position sort of taking upon themselves leadership. So we discussed a little bit of this aspect of like the accountant getting in charge. Like you have the historical saints that go and they're homeless and have no money, and yet they manage to found 20 parishes, and then all of a sudden everybody becomes money minded, and then the place shuts down after 300 years. Within 5 years of all the accountants showing up and taking over, like everything kind of goes down. And I have been seeing that in my own local area. Like it literally happened multiple times, and it's like in the progress of happening, and no one really notices it. But it's interesting that this chapter happened this week after we had all these different examples. Just getting like some really nice contrast of like, it's there's a dignity in remaining in your station and like not trying to avoid that. And we talked a little bit about this that kind of like famous passage that a lot of people are maybe a little bit timid about getting into, but the thing of like Jesus saying to Peter, "Get behind me, Satan." But that's not like, it's not a dismissive thing. It's like, fall in line. It's like, you have your job. Like, don't tell me you don't do mine, type of thing. And it's just like, that's you have that sort of aspect of, if the person is approaching it aligned to the same common goal, in this case like a whaleman, that he'll listen to the captain. It's like maybe he gets a little too big for his britches or something like that, but if he's not trying to lead everyone astray, then he would have at least submitted to some sort of authority.
Right, right. Yeah. Yeah. No, it's I think if you've ever read the book Extreme Ownership by
Yeah,
Jocko Willink, he talks really well about how he just fed information up the chain
yeah,
of command
yeah, yeah,
and actually invited one of his superiors in rather than kind of doing the common thing and hoping that his commanding officer didn't come and visit their post. Um, and that was kind of a pain, and it was a little bit riskier, right? It is a little bit
yeah,
riskier for your higher ups to actually know what you're doing, but it does also help them, helps the mission, and it can cut things can flow back down. It's like, oh, you guys are doing really great things here. Well, why don't we, because I'm higher up here, I can furnish you with this, I can furnish you with that.
yeah,
Yeah, and there's a little bit of, I think, a little bit of skepticism around here. Like this Gabriel fellow is holding himself out as a prophet, but even Ishmael kind of notes, I can't remember where exactly he said it. It's like, that could have just been a lucky guess. All he had to
yeah,
do, and when you hear about these whaling expeditions, it sounds like people were getting killed and seriously maimed all the time because they're, hunting off of a creature, 100 times your size with spears and harpoons on a really rickety boat. It's like
yeah,
he could have just been rolling the dice on that one.
yeah,
But especially with Moby Dick, like he could have heard just enough sailor
mm,
stories to realize, oh, white whale, this is going to be a useful one to cash in on.
yeah. And there's that aspect that Ishmael kind of describes in a previous chapter of like that everyone's adrenaline level is just so high, and there's this constant stimulation that, if he says like if the devil himself just waltzed in out of the sea into the captain's quarters, like no one would bat an eye. It's just like, okay, like what's happening for lunch, and it just kind of reminds me of that thing with like Saint Paul after he shipwrecked. that you have
Mhm.
those islanders that see him and he gets bitten by a snake, and people are like, oh gosh, he must be getting his comeuppance. Surely we'll see him die here in a couple of minutes, and he just shakes the snake off, and they're like, no, he must be some sort of like minor deity or something like that. You just immediate flip flop, and it's like anyway, back to business. Like they don't even approach him about it. They're just like, oh okay, you know,
Yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, that's life out on the edge, right?
yeah.
It's, things are just more unexpected things are going to happen when you're out in a boat in the middle of nowhere, miles and miles away from any civilization. So
Yeah.
that's pretty straightforward.
And it says here he was of sort of unusual appearance too. So like he was a small guy with freckles and yellow hair, and he has a nice line here that says, in that wild whaling life where individual notabilities make up all totalities. So it's just like, yeah, you even have like the kind of the edginess of every single person as well, but he's especially just odd, like he sticks out like a sore thumb, where even Ahab sees him instantly, even though he's on like a lower part of the ship.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah, yeah.
Uh,
But what do you think of him being named the vessel being named Jeroboam?
so
I know
that
I'm supposed to know who
was
that is, but
I don't remember if Jeroboam was he one of the kings of Israel or Judah, but he apparently
I think that he
walks
was the
even
first
more
king.
wickedly.
Okay, I just looked it up and now I've got it remembered. He
Mm,
was the king who split the kingdom, the northern kingdom, off from Solomon's son Rehoboam.
mm,
So Jeroboam was the one who he um, he split the northern kingdom off from the southern kingdom. He founded or maybe not founded, but like refounded the temple at Bethel, and I believe he actually made a golden calf there.
I think he made two actually, as if one wasn't enough. He had to double down on that one.
Yeah. So
Not
anyway,
surprising they did idolatry on that ship. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. So we've got yeah, we just got this example of rebellion. But it's funny because it's um you remember why the northern kingdom got split off from the southern kingdom in the country of Israel. First, it was the sins of David
Mm,
when he took Bathsheba as his wife and had Uriah the Hittite killed.
mm,
The Lord said that the sword would never leave his house at that point, and then you can kind of see a lot of the
yeah.
stories after that are the fall of King David, and then you've got the sins of his son Solomon, um, turning to idolatry while also worshiping the God of Israel. So he's a mixed bag. He falls away from the wisdom of his youth and has many foreign wives,
Like a
and
thousand.
that's the point when the Lord says, "Okay, I'm gonna strip most of the kingdom away from the line of David, but I am going to leave them a remnant out of respect for my servant David." And
Mm,
then it's during the time of Rehoboam that the split actually happens. And, you know, Solomon had taxed the whole kingdoms quite extensively while he was building the temple. I mean, and then he built the temple and then he completed the temple. And the northern kingdoms were kind of like, "Hey, can we get a break here from some of the taxes? We got the temple. Temple's great." And the elders of Israel were counseling Rehoboam, who was young when he took over. You should listen to them. Give him a little bit of appeasement. Give him a little bit of a break, and um, and things will go well for you. And then Rehoboam went and asked his friends, and they're like, "Nah, he
Oh, Father Eric, you're lagging pretty hard all of a sudden. Yeah, if you can hear me, you totally froze up. I think you're moving again. Yeah, you're muted. I see you moving, but I don't hear you. No, I lost you again.
Right.
Yeah, I'm still missing you. Your movement seems a little normal now.
Oh, am I back?
With a slight delay, but yes, I think so.
Yeah. Yeah. So anyway, Rehoboam asks his friends, and they say, "Yeah, go ahead, keep on taxing the north." And he threatens that he'll have them whipped with scorpions if they don't pay up, and so they rebel, and he loses control of the northern kingdoms. And
Oh my
Jeroboam
god.
was the one who set up there.
So it's coming back to me now. Jeroboam, I only remember him as the guy that said my little finger is bigger than my father's thigh. It's just like what a ridiculous statement to say. And that was right after his buddies. And that was right after the servants came to him. And then that was where he threatened the whipping them with scorpions. But yeah, that he literally says like my little finger is bigger than my father's thigh. It's like what a stupid like arrogant thing to possibly say. And but yeah, and then it's like the one of those things where it's got like the Curb Your Enthusiasm intro type of thing, where it immediately winds up losing his his kingdom after just like a short while after that.
Yeah, yeah. Was it Rehoboam who said my little fingers is bigger than my father's thigh, or was it Jeroboam?
Whoever it was that said that he was going to whip them with scorpions.
That was Rehoboam then.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. So like Jeroboam's a guy who rebels against things that are going poorly and then makes things worse.
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
I'm sure
they
if I were
sure know how to pick
wiser, I'd
these things.
yeah. It's I don't know, it's just funny. It's just funny. Um
Yeah. So and then it's interesting that he like as cool as the archangel Gabriel is, it's interesting that he chooses an angel to show up as like the authority on the apocalypse as well. Like just kind of and that everyone kind of just like totally buys it, you know. And I did find it kind of funny here this thing where he's talking about that he had been nurtured among the Society of the Niskuna Shakers, and he had been a great prophet there. And he said, in their secret meetings, having several times descended from heaven by the way of a trapdoor. So it's like these basement meetings and everything. It's just really funny imagery that he has there.
well, it's also you get the sense that he's doing some shenanigans, like a magic trick popping out of the ceiling to
Yeah,
convince people that he's an angel. Um, so he's kind of a charlatan the whole way through.
yeah. And it says here also, I forgot that he says that the plague, which he called it a plague, this Gabriel guy said that it was at his sole command. So also like he's saying, oh, I'm controlling this plague, and then meanwhile they believe it, and then no one is sick, the entire time, and then people were like rendering him personal homage. So you also have that thing of like throughout the Bible, if anyone had read it, like every time there's an angel, they're like, why are you asking my name? Or like, why are you trying to give me a gift? It's just like I don't need any of this stuff.
Mhm.
And whereas he's just like, yes, please, by all means, give me all of your things, and then
Yeah.
maybe I'll consider not plaguing you.
Yeah. I mean, this is I think kind of pointing us to it's kind of like the Q stuff, right?
Hmm.
Like I'm not too deep into the whole thing, but it sounds like Q, and I'm not talking about Star Trek Next Gen, is just putting a lot of signal out there. It's just constantly saying, "Oh, this is going to happen. This is going to happen. This is going to happen," and then is sometimes correct. But if you're just putting money on everything, you're going to end up being correct eventually. But if people have already put their trust in you, then they're gonna bias towards the correctness and go away from the times that they're incorrect, even if the person never owns up to it and apologizes for it.
Yeah.
That's
Y-
basically what Gabriel's up to. He's putting a lot of signal out there, and just happens to be right about the Moby Dick thing, that it's a big whale that kills people, and then yeah,
Yeah. And it's interesting too, this thing of like I've been kind of observing this a little bit recently of um that that level of signaling and like the confidence with which you signal. I was thinking about this within like a benevolent sort of perspective of like, hey, you're trying to exemplify confidence in the faith or something like that, to friends and family and that sort of thing. And realizing like a lot of people are just really afraid to be the first one to say something or to even admit that they believe something or something like that. But if someone comes out really confident, they could be completely wrong, But if they're the loudest or the most visible, then people are going to be like, well, like no one's attacking him, no one is disagreeing, so he must be right. It's like that sort of implicit agreement.
every once in a while when we're talking about something, I'll just make something up and I'll say it really confidently, but it'll be just a little bit on the edge.
Yeah.
And then people kind of look at me like, really? And maybe they'll be like, really? And I'm like, nah, I made that up. So I'm not intending to deceive them,
Yeah.
but it's like,
Keep them on
yeah,
their
if you
toes.
can, yeah, if you can speak with enough confidence, like people will just kind of follow you. That's why some real morons have a YouTube following,
Yeah.
because
It,
they speak with an awful lot of confidence. And this is also something that happens within groups. It's like if you can get 10% of the group convinced about something, it'll win over another 70%. There's like a
yeah.
threshold somewhere around 10% of commitment. I think that's how the Republican Party became pro-life in the 1970s.
Mm.
Is there was like a real push from Catholics to go in and like kind of influence the Republican Party platform in a particular direction. So the way Richard Rowland actually talked about this in some conversation like a year ago, it was like, yeah, the way the Republican Party put the pro-life into the platform was the Catholics just came in and shamed everybody else into it.
Mm.
So yeah, confidence is not worthy of your full confidence.
Right. I so to that point, and also within the pro life thing, it's interesting. I was listening to a talk by those Divine Mercy guys over in Massachusetts, and they were talking about this thing where the original data that came out for like American support, like way back when like the whole Roe v. Wade stuff started and everything like that, that apparently when they went on news, the doctor, something Nathanson, went on there and was telling people, like these news people, and they ran with the story and saying, 60% of Americans are agreeing with this, but the actual data, and he admitted it to this later when he changed his position, was it was 10% of 1% actually agreed, and he blew it up to 60 full percent. And that was enough to be like, oh, well, if it's the majority, it's like it wasn't even 1%, not even half of 1%, but that's enough influence, like enough of a smokescreen, to
Yeah.
to pull that. And it's funny, I was at like a social gathering and I was talking to another guy that's in the Knights of Columbus, and the guy uh does, like, I'm not going to claim to be like some sort of master of theology or anything like that, but the guy was very off on a lot of things. And I realized, I was like, well, like and we were running out of time too, and I was like, I could yell at this guy for the next 3 hours over the stuff that he got wrong. Little things like, oh, the saints of the early centuries are just kind of like recreations of Greek mythological characters and stuff that were readopted so that people could, and these sorts of things. And I was just like, dude, like, how did you get in here? But but also, and I was like, well, I can't just start like attacking this guy. But I also realized, I was like, I need to step up my game, because he was really confident when he told me this, and I was like, you know, I got some disagreements with you, but we got 5 minutes left. It's just like, but next time I'm probably gonna have to signal louder. Like, I'm not gonna win this guy over through argumentation, but I'm gonna have to put out some better signals, because he's very confident.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, and that one counter signal can be very effective
Yeah.
because there might be a lot of people waiting for it,
Yeah.
and they'll actually back you up even if they're not in a position to be the first through the door. They might be the second or the third.
Yeah. I think of there's that Temple Grandin, the animal behaviorist, and she's also like a she herself is very autistic from childhood, and she is an expert in autism in children specifically, and she it's all about like visual thinking, but she talks about herd animals. And I wonder if this applies to whales as well, because a lot of them travel in sort of herds, but that the dominant animal is actually not at the front or in the back, it's in the center. It's kind of like the strong core, but doesn't actually make the main decisions, and that it's the most exploratory animal, for better or worse. I mean, if the most exploratory one is dumb and they all go walking off a cliff, like that's, but people, the other animals will recognize, okay, this one encountered the scary thing and did it first, and therefore it must be okay, and then again, for better or worse, they wind up following that one. But yeah, so it's like, well, that's the one that's giving off the biggest signal. It's like the Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer of cows, you know.
Yeah, yeah. And you got to be careful. Like, is this person really brave and visionary, or are they just stupid?
Yeah,
And
yeah.
it's not immediately going to be obvious. You might have to dig into it a little bit.
And in this case with Gabriel, it's like, or maybe the most psychopathic, person in a place where there is no strong leader. Because maybe if this captain actually reasserted his authority and did like the get behind me Satan thing and like really held his ground with a good enough signal, like he could have quelled that in one sentence, but
Yeah, a good whipping.
yeah, something.
Like, oh, you're an archangel, huh? Oh, well, let me
Yeah.
put 40 lashes minus one across your back and see how angelic you are.
So, but
That's just how these ships
man,
operated.
yeah,
It's like
I mean, yeah.
I'd prefer to just pay you and you do your job, but if not, here we are.
Yeah. It's like of all places, really, you're doing business on a whale ship. It's like, what could you possibly do from a whaling ship? Like, you need oil
Yeah.
for your mission. But yeah, and it's interesting, this thing of the guy that was kind of like, prophesied to be in danger. The leader that goes out to hunt Moby Dick just gets like flicked out of the boat, and there's absolutely no damage whatsoever, just like this perfect tail flick of the guy. And then when he was found, that there was no mark of violence, like none whatsoever. He just got like, the whale smote him, you know, and
Yeah.
and then they talk about the mail thing. So that aspect of, it had been sitting there for a long time, and at this point, like the letters got mold on it, and it's like barely even legible or anything like that. And it's like, oh, we've got a letter for you guys, and then it turns out that was the one guy that died. It's
Hmm.
just like, this is
Hmm.
just the worst mail service. It got where it was supposed to, though. I mean, credit to the person who sent it off. And but I had an interesting experience this week. I had a guy that asked me to order some scapulars for him, and I did it because I had a few on hand, and he was like, "Oh, do you have more?" And he gave me some cash to order it, and we waited like 3 months or something like that. There was like this major back order, and they finally showed up this week on like Wednesday, and I didn't know where this guy was going to be, and I actually don't have his phone number or email. I just knew where he asked me to do it, and I was like, I know that I had been there lots of times, and he was there like 1 in 8 times. The guy was there, and I brought it in my pocket on an off chance, and I was like, all right, I'm gonna do the Moby Dick, like, ship mail thing, and the guy was there, and I was like, that's awesome, because I also stopped going there, so I was like, oh, I have no idea what his schedule is like, but that was a fun little playing out of that in my week.
Yeah, yeah. No, and it's sort of like, despite all of the nonsensical false prophets out there, that doesn't actually illegitimate God's providence.
Right.
Like, the fact that there are false prophets out there doesn't mean that the true providence of God is now illegitimate. It's like, well, no, actually, it does still happen, and you should pay attention to what's going on, despite all of the people who are trying to profit off of this illegitimately.
Yeah. And I think it does come down to that sort of the egocentrism of the messenger too, where it's just like if the person like gives glory to God for the thing that they did, that it's just like probably they're not a liar. Like it's less likely that they're a liar, as opposed to if it's just like, yeah, it was all me. It's just like, yeah, probably.
I am the special one.
Yeah, look at me,
Yeah.
pay more attention. It's like, yeah,
Yeah.
why do you ask my name? Like that should be the appropriate response, you know?
Yeah. All right, let's take a look at chapter 72.
Okay.
The monkey rope there. So apparently, when they're we get this crazy chronological flipping back and forth, right? Because now we're going back to butchering the whale. And Ishmaelville says we gotta actually go back and think about that again. They'll send a harpooneer down to take what was he doing there? To
Uh,
actually put the hooks into the whale so that they could hoist them up there,
yeah,
and that sort of thing. And he's got to be attached to something called a monkey rope, because he's kind of like walking on the back of a whale in water, and has to go try and keep his balance. And apparently, Stubb was the one who came up with the idea that it should be belted to somebody else on the crew. Most everybody else would have it belted to probably hitched to, I don't know, some sturdy post there, and then somebody helping him with the rope. But Stubb thought it would work better if the other guy was also attending to the rope. So it's Queequeg down there, and Queequeg's apparently down there for hours. And while they're doing the unrolling of the blubber bit, he's got to like keep his balance on there. So I think that's why they send the harpooneers there, because you get the sense that the harpooneers are probably the most physically fit on the entire and the best balance. So he's down there for hours. He's got sharks coming after him. Tash, Tigo, and Dagu have to keep him safe with uh, the big knife things, the big lances. What are they called? Whaling shovels.
yeah,
And
they're like spades. Yeah.
yeah, the whaling spades. That's it. And then when Queequeg gets back up, he's exhausted. He's soaked. He needs to have his spirits cheered. The Mr. Doughboy, the not the cook, he's the cabin boy, brings out a tepid ginger substance and says, "Aunt Charity told me to give me this to the harpooneers. I wasn't allowed to." And it's like, yeah, Aunt Charity isn't here. The ginger goes into the
Yeah.
ocean, and then Queequeg gets some kind of a spirit. Um,
Hmm.
Rum, whiskey, doesn't really matter. So I just, because you could just imagine that happening.
Yeah.
Super easy to imagine. Like Aunt Charity doesn't want these heathens to get addicted to the drink, and she's in Nantucket there in the Pacific, and her authority is now gone.
Yeah. You know, it's funny. It was kind of mentioned. I think it was by RJ in like a very early sort of episode of this thing of, oh, we're not going to see the feminine influence again, you know, and we see the attempt of like the long distance feminine influence. It's like, nope, into the water you go. It's like, you know, no more of that. And I mean, and the thing is, like, Stubb is such a dubious character. I mean, we've already seen like he has these crazy ramblings while he's out on the boat and everything, and then he just treats people in a completely just actually psychotic way for his own entertainment. And then you get this thing where the Pequod is the only ship of all the whaling ships that does this monkey rope thing. No
What
one
does the
else thought
monkey
to do
rope with the other guy
right.
attached?
Yeah, yeah.
Right,
And so he's
risking the
got
lives of two crew instead of just one.
exactly. And he even Ishmael describes it here as, oh, you know, you've seen the Italian organ boys holding a dancing ape on a long cord. So it's like there's this sort of like circus aspect to it. And it's just like, did Stubb make this up for his own entertainment? Because he's there watching too. And it's just like he's just watching it for hours. And it's just like, yeah, you know, these people might actually just be kind of dispensable to him. And then, you know, there's some funny imagery here of the like Ishmael and Queequeg being inseparable, like Siamese twins on a ligature there, and then the very strange kind of like representation of like the marital bond imagery as well. This sort of like I go you go type of thing. And he says that he sort of laments his loss of his own individuality at this point, and even says that there was an interregnum in Providence for its even-handed equity never could have so gross an injustice. So there's this sort of thing of in that situation where you have no control over it, you might think that you would like completely surrender to Providence at that point, but he's just like, no, it has no part in it, and I have been given a raw deal. It's just like, it's a very inverted way of looking at it.
Mhm.
Uh,
Yeah, and then he takes this as a precious image. Are you not the precious image of each and all of us men in the whaling world? I kind of like this petition here. That unsounded ocean you gasp in is life, those sharks your foes, those spades your friends, and what between sharks and spades you are in a sad pickle and peril, poor lad. Because he was talking about how, these whaling spades aren't particularly nimble weapons, and they're trying to keep the sharks off of him mere feet away from his feet. And
yeah.
yeah, he's just got this sense that this is just a really dangerous place to be. And like this image of Queequeg running around on the back of the whale while it's spinning. Don't fall in between the ship. Don't get beat by a shark, and don't get your leg taken off with a whaling spade. It's like that's life.
Yeah. And the whaling spades are like on 20-foot poles as well,
Something
and
like
the
that.
the spade
Yeah.
itself is like the size of a hand,
Yeah.
so it's just like you just have these spears coming past you and everything. Have you ever seen like that old game show Wipeout, where they have people running like the obstacle course, and then eventually someone goes and they grab onto this giant, I think of like those big padded things that they'll just grab onto it, and as soon as they grab on, like it's over, like there's no recovery from that, and it's like he's in that for hours, and he's got
Yeah.
spears that are coming past him and sharks below him. It's like it's good TV, but also it's like that's completely terrifying.
Better him than me. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh my goodness.
Yeah. And that monkey rope is his only connection to safety.
Yeah. And
Tenuous connection that doesn't always work.
yeah. And then that thing just with the ginger as well is that who knows if someone would have actually needed that ginger at some point. Like I mean, ginger is a pretty common aid for like seasickness and that type of thing. So it's this also kind of like complete rejection of the unfamiliar as well, like whether or not it's helpful. But it's like it's the domestic unfamiliar. Like they're so far out that they don't like the inside stuff. And he even says like, "I'll teach you to drug a harpooner." And he's like, "None of your apothecary's medicine here. You want to poison us, do you?" And it's like it's so ridiculous.
Yeah. All right. Chapter 73. Ahab makes a very strange decision here that they're going to go take a right whale, and I don't have any insider knowledge on whales. As far as I can tell, right whales don't produce near as high quality oil, and that's the main objection to taking one. But Ahab said they were going to, and he's the captain, and they will get oil out of it. Apparently, it's just of an inferior quality, not a high quality there.
Hmm.
Um, and then after Stubb and Flask take it, they're discussing, why is Ahab doing this? We're here to get sperm whales. A right whale isn't like good business, or we're just wasting our time. We're wasting space on the ship. What's going on here? And apparently, there's some kind of a legend, or some kind of a something that he might have heard from Fadala, that if you've got a sperm whale on one side and a right whale on the other side of your ship, it can't capsize.
Hmm.
So they're suspecting that it might be some kind of a superstitious thing that Ahab wants to take this right whale and so they could have both on each side and not flip over there. Um, yeah, and then there's this really interesting. We're gonna spend some time with this.
Mm.
Here we go. Am I in the right chapter? I think I am. Here we go. Here we go. Found it. In good time, Flask's saying proved true. As before, the Pequod steeply leaned over towards the sperm whale's head. Now, by the counterpoise of both heads, she regained her even keel. Though sorely strained, you may well believe. So when on one side you hoist Locke's head, you go over that way, but now on the other side hoist in Kant's, and you come back again, but in a very poor plight. Thus some minds forever keep trimming boat. O ye foolish, throw all these thunderheads overboard, and then you will float light and right. So just in case you still thought we were doing a book about whaling, we come into two of the most influential modern thinkers, Locke, the empiricist, and Kant, the idealist. And that's a very like this image he gets here. You could totally see people trying to do it and it not working at all, right? So Locke had this idea of just empiricism and like the outside world just imposes itself on you, and that's how knowledge works. He also had an idea that this was either Locke or Hobbes. I think it was both of them actually. That the qualities of different objects don't actually exist inside the objects. They only exist inside your senses,
Mm.
right? And the only things that really exist are those that we can actually measure, right? Length, width, height, weight. Those are real primary qualities, but the secondary qualities, color, texture, taste, those only exist inside of our senses there. So you've got this, on one hand, this extreme empiricism there. On the other hand, you've got idealism, right? Kant was reacting against the empiricism mostly of Hume, but Hume was of the same mind as Locke and Hobbes, and he said, well, actually, these the way that our intelligence works is we get all of this random information coming out here, and our interior processes put it together into a coherent whole. And so all of these different categories are categories of our understanding. Um, and so it's the interior categories of the understanding are how we actually understand the world. And then you got the 19th. So both of these are like 17th, 18th century figures. You got the 19th century, which has been hugely influenced by both of these strands of thought, which are both incorrect, but they're trying to hold on to both of them. And it's just making them go crazy.
Yeah. Yeah, I have a great advantage of having not bothered to read either of those guys, and so I feel pretty stable. Like I don't know, I think it's this interesting. Like I get this twisted image of like you got these two heads like training wheels on either side of the boat, and it's like well the boat can float just fine if you just don't have either of them on top of the thing, or you can have one on each side and then kind of be moving okay. It's
Yeah,
just like
but
well,
you're much lower in the water now.
right, yeah.
So
So you're way down.
here's another way that you can get your mind around Locke and Kant. Um, Locke was trying to solve a lot of the political problems that they had in England at the time, and it's almost impossible for us to grasp. But like the Middle Ages through the early modern period, the way people tried to resolve or political disputes was by references to theology,
Mhm.
which is like, I mean, yeah, but like kind of no.
Yeah.
You know, it's like it's not really going to work. And so Locke had the bright idea that, well, how should we be interpreting the Bible? The Bible, we should actually interpret that by means of our reason. And whatever rationally we can discover in the scriptures, that'll be what the proper interpretation is, right? So, not any kind of tradition, right? Not any kind of inspiration from the Holy Spirit, just our rationality, understanding this. Kant took all of that and he said, yeah, yeah, so all of our ethics, all of the way we're going to behave and everything that we're going to value, we need to deduce that via reason. And everything that comes under religion is just going to be an ascetic personal experience that doesn't have any binding weight on anybody.
Mm,
It's
yeah.
like that's what's happening in the 19th century with our mechanized technological society, is that they're like trying to do that, and the ship's going underwater because it's just weighed down and taking things much lower.
Yeah, I mean, it's just they're swinging back and forth between two things. Like there's that sort of dualism is dualism, type of thing, but also,
Mhm.
there's so many other things. It's funny, just a few days ago, there's a student at the local college. They have a Newman Association, and they invited me to do like a little talk over there. I did one once before, and they asked me to do a talk on the four senses of reading scripture. So you've got the literal, the allegorical, the moral, and the anagogical. And so I'm going to be kind of putting some notes together, and hopefully not like up to 10 minutes before I leave the house like I did the last time. No one noticed. It went great, but writer's block is a real thing. But it's an interesting thing that you've got at least four ways, and I'm sure I could break those down into, I'm supposed to only talk for like 20-25 minutes. I could do it for like 3 hours probably, and just keep all these people from going to bed. But but just see that where it's just like, oh gosh, we're just going to either, we're going to have a political debate and we're just going to sling Bible verses at each other like some sort of like Harry Potter wand fight, or we're going to do it all like, oh, what are my personal feelings about this? And it's just like, yeah, of course you're just kind of like, you're just kind of weighed down and not, and you've got these misshapen heads too. Like the sperm whale is like 1/3 head. And then the right whale has a pretty big head. Like I've got a picture there.
Oh, I got pictures too. I got pictures
Excellent.
too.
I love me
Yeah,
some
yeah.
whales. Let's see it.
Ah, ah, ah. Open link and new tab.
All right. Yeah, if there's an absence or vacancy in whale pictures, I got you covered. But I'm glad you've got.
That's a right whale right there.
Oh yeah, what a beaut.
As you can see, yeah, the head isn't quite as big.
Yeah,
Oh,
and
that's not big enough.
and they're at least on average. Well, so that's up to 59 feet. So that's like the maximum range, whereas the average for a sperm whale is like 80, or like between 70 and 80, but like up to 100 as far as Moby Dick is concerned, if they're accurate in their measurement.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but yeah, I mean, just an enormous head, and also the difference there with the fact that the entire upper part of the sperm whale's head is full of that spermaceti oil, and it's already essentially pre-refined. Like all you have to do is extract it, whereas there is no organ of the same type inside the right whale. You have to like essentially boil it down for its parts, and it's like that's a much more labor intensive process. Hypothetically, I think we may have a chapter coming up pretty soon about the challenges of extracting the oil from the head, but but yeah, having to go through and like remove all of these different parts of this heavy thing, like that's a lot of work for a much lower yield.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. All right. Well, we're going to keep on talking about these heads, so let's just keep on cooking along. Uh, I I don't have a whole lot of recap for 74 and 75, but basically what it comes down to is Ishmaelville thinks that sperm whales are majestic creatures, noble creatures, but he spends a lot of time um, thinking about how uh, strange it must be to be a whale with
Mm.
eyes pointing to the sides and not seeing what's right in front of you. The tiny little ears, and yeah, honestly, I think the pictures might do more than any of the descriptions I could possibly come up with. So apparently, we look at this. We look at this sperm whale here.
Mm.
The sperm whale is a Platonian who might have taken up Spinoza in his later years. And the right whale is a to have been a Stoic.
Yeah, I like the imagery that he has here, and really thinking about that sort of perspective of you've got still decent vision, but he talks a lot of like kind of the going from like the bifocal vision and then having like completely different perspectives that you aren't getting like a contrasting view of the same image, and that your brain kind of fills in the rest with like at least in humans the back of your brain is filling in the sight aspect. And this sort of thing, I think about, like, I think Jordan Peterson's talked about this. Like, a blind person can see, maybe they can't look at something and perceive it through their eyes, but like the sight aspect is still engaged. And then with the sort of overlap between the audio and visual portions of the brain and the back and sides, that a lot of times, like, when you're reading something, that sometimes a lot of people will read it in a certain voice, and like there's that sort of overlapping part, but also like you hear something and then an image comes to mind, and there's a lot of that visual thinking, like as is very common in like animals, as I talked about with the ruminant animals. And
And that
but
that corresponds pretty well with the common sense
yeah.
in like Aristotelian Thomistic anthropology, that we have a faculty of the soul that brings the disparate senses that we have coming in and helps unify things into what we could call percepts, right? Things that we perceive, individual things that we can encounter and understand. We would call that the common sense there, and it can coordinate between these different senses that we have, such that the sight that we see of something, the sound it's making, the smell, all of those things we can like understand that's all be coming from one thing.
Yeah, I see what you mean.
Yeah.
But and yeah, I think it's a really interesting thing, kind of going from those perspectives of he says this thing of like, even if you had a bunch of objects that are all super close, like you can't really focus on each one. Like you have to kind of, I think about this, if you're trying to track like a bunch of moving objects at once, like to a certain degree you're focusing on one thing, and then all of the other objects are kind of like one larger object of lower resolution that you're just kind of you've got like an amorphous sort of movement that you're just tracking that happening there. And yeah, this thing of how does it actually process within the brain of this whale, which especially with the sperm whale, which has a very thin, almost ram-like head, that you've essentially got like a really thick brick wall with eyes on either side, and it's like, is it able to focus on one thing over here and then another thing over there and actually be able to discern that, or does it have to like switch from one eye to another? And that much, I haven't gotten super deep into like whale neurology, but one of these
Yeah.
days.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's a bit of a trouble with, so for human beings, our vision is the most detail rich sense that we have,
Mm.
right? And you can hear Dr. Peterson talk about how the reason our brains are so big and so complex is so we can process color. You can hear Aristotle say that vision is the most pleasing of senses because it brings the most amount of information with it. But there is a certain amount of projection that Ishmaelville's doing here when he imagines that this whale's vision works on the same principles and the same ideas that human vision does, where it's this important to our perception.
Mm.
Whereas, like for the whale, it might just be some like useful information, but the smell and the sound are much more useful to him. And then the vision is just kind of supporting that. Whereas our vision is what's most important to us, and all the other senses are just kind of assisting and aiding that. At least that's my experience. I don't know if that's your experience. I imagine it is.
Yeah, I mean, I would definitely have to agree. And there's this thing with like whale communication too. Like they can, especially like sperm whales, they can communicate at such a high frequency that, I mean, they can communicate across, I'm pretty sure, like over 100 miles, something like that, underwater.
And if
And
you were next to their throat while they were making these noises, you would
yeah,
go deaf.
Yeah, and you could even be shouted to death by a whale, like just the
Yeah, yeah.
vibration alone. Yeah,
Mhm.
and and it's interesting that they can be very gentle. Like they actually know how to use an inside voice and everything. They're not. But yeah, I think it's interesting too. This he mentions there's a little bit of foreshadowing, interestingly enough, about the peculiarity of the whale's eyes as a thing always to be borne in mind in the fishery and to be remembered by the reader in some subsequent scenes. So I think we're going to see some examples of how the vision works. And to your point of the vision is very much kind of secondary to these other senses. Like, was Moby Dick accidentally flicking that guy off of the boat, or did he really line up the shot perfectly? And it's just like how capable are these whales of precise movement with what limited body parts they have to do things.
Oh, they've got limited vision, but I think they're quite sharp on other things.
Yeah,
I mean, you think about how cool it is that we actually have um, binocular here or bi-auricular hearing, and we could use that to track
yeah,
objects in space fairly well, right?
yeah,
Because whales' ears are much farther apart, they should actually be able to hear with much greater fidelity which direction something's coming from them,
mm,
assuming they have the same kind of machinery. And there's no reason to assume that that sort of thing is connected with intelligence necessarily,
yeah. I think
right?
there's a
Because it's farther apart, it should give them greater binocular bi-auricular precision.
like, more contrasts
Yeah,
probably
more
between
contrast. Yeah.
there's a video of this lady that goes out and she like dives with sperm whales sometimes, and there is a she had like one thing where they actually caught it on video, and she's down there and the whale is like nose to nose with her pretty much, and the whale is making like very subtle clicks, and like she can feel the vibration of it, but it's super quiet for as far as whales are concerned. And they said the whale was getting an X-ray view of this diver, and it's like, oh, if that's the case, like I wonder how well you could kind of translate that from underwater to above water. But I guess if the person's feet are planted firmly on the boat, then you could probably get a pretty decent image, at least sufficiently for, oh, there's something standing there. You could get a good view of its feet, I guess, with your ears, as a whale. It's like it's tough to relate to that, but yeah, that would be interesting to see how this
Well, and
plays
these
out. Like,
sailing vessels are noisy too.
oh yeah, they're
You've
shouting
got
and
stuff up there, giving instructions to people. They're paddling. They're constantly having to adjust their footing because the thing's rocking back and forth like crazy.
yeah.
That's probably the whale equivalent of a neon sign for us,
Oh yeah.
just blasting a ton of information. We don't have any trouble seeing it.
Oh yeah.
A big LCD screen.
I think of these weird sort of like levels of competence to your point of like, it's not necessarily an intelligence thing. That there are certain animals that when they've done sort of they try to do experiments, like there was this one thing where there were birds that were outsmarting the scientists that were trying to separate them. So they had like a control group, and then they had another one that they were giving food as a reward, and they would transition some of the birds from one room to another, and they would make sure like, okay, when this bird is going to be going in for this testing, we're going to make sure it doesn't have any food. And so they were actually smuggling food in for the other birds. And they had been doing it for like weeks until they found out that the birds had a stash, and it's just like, oh, how did all these treats get in here? And it's like, no, they had like a communal, like I had an old coworker that had a snack drawer in his filing cabinet. It's just like, oh my gosh, they had a snack drawer,
Yeah.
or you get like elephants, like people decided, oh, elephants are stupid because we gave it a stick and it wouldn't do anything with the stick. We gave it a tool that it could knock something out of a tree so that they could eat it, and it never picked it up and used it. Like it could reach the thing if it just grabbed it with its trunk and then did it. And it should hypothetically know the distance with those things, but oh, maybe it's just too dumb to bother it. And then somebody put a bunch of large movable objects that the whale could stand on, and the whale actually creates stairs for itself. So it turns out that sorry, not whales, elephants are good at platforming. And it's like, of all things, the giant heavy animal with no knees is actually really, really good at creating staircases and then climbing up them. Who would have thought that it would sooner do that and like just move an entire set of platforms and do puzzling like that instead of just grabbing a stick and knocking the thing out of a tree.
Well, I mean, if it's fruit, the fruit might not survive the journey to the ground.
True. And
Maybe
probably harder to pick
actually
up.
getting up there and pulling on it is a better strategy. I don't know, but
That's a good point. Yeah, I mean, and it's probably a lot less palatable if the thing is just smashed all over the ground. And how well can you pick it up really at that point with just a nose?
yeah.
So I like this line here that he says, that he talks about the very tiny eyes, the very tiny ears, and he says, but if his eyes were as broad as the lens of Herschel's great telescope, and if his ears as capacious as the porches of cathedrals, would that make him any longer of sight or sharper of hearing? Not at all. Why then do you try to enlarge your mind, subtleize it? So there is that kind of like, and I feel like this sort of echoes a little bit with the Locke and Kant thing. There's just like, why are you overcomplicating things? It's that much easier to just kind of do the thing. And it reminds me of that thing with like St. Thomas Aquinas, where he said like his best ideas were from praying and leaning his head against the tabernacle. It's like really this guy, like the super intelligence academic guy, is actually
Remembered everything he ever read.
yeah. And it's just, oh yeah, no, my best ideas were from cozy time. And it's just like, yep, that's exactly right.
Yeah, yeah, I heard that too. You get a lot of honestly, the trends that we're kind of swimming in now were well underway by the 19th century when Melville was writing this, and some of this obsession with we could just gather in enough information, and if we can just we'll have great encyclopedias, we'll have the best science. That's going to fix everything, and a real lack of real wisdom in kind of the scientism, the progressivism of the 19th and early 20th centuries. It's kind of naive to imagine all of that.
Yeah, let me calculate the velocity of the train coming right at me. Or just walk 2 steps to the left.
All right. I don't have much more to say. I'm sure there's more here to puzzle and ponder out, but I did 4 masses in the last 24 hours, and
Oh, nice.
I'm uh, I'm just feeling it. That's all.
Yeah. Let me see if I can find this here.
If
So
you've
he's
got some
talking
insights, yeah, go.
just a little bit. I don't know if you wouldn't mind bringing up the right whale picture again, just to sort of demonstrate this. So he says, look at that hanging lower lip. With what a huge sulk and pout is there. A sulk and pout by Carpenter's measurement about 20 feet long and 5 feet deep. A sulk and pout that will yield you some 500 gallons of oil and more. So even still, like, I mean, I don't know really what the contrast is and how much. I mean, I think he went into some detail in previous chapters of how much whale oil you could get off of a sperm whale. But I mean, if you take this guy's lips and you can still get 500 gallons of oil, like that doesn't seem like too bad of a
Is it the
yield.
same quality of oil though?
Probably not. I mean, you could probably just burn it in lanterns. Like you probably couldn't use it for ointments or something like that. But even still, I mean, that's an interesting sort of thing to think. Like his pouty lips are themselves what 20 feet long and 5 feet deep. And it's just like it's looking at the faces of these whales is always really kind of interesting. I mean, I can't help but gosh, what was the name of it was the blackfish that had the Mephistophelian grin. Just kind of, I don't know. There's something very entertaining about just looking like more closely at a lot of these animals.
Yeah, and the human tendency to assign personality to these animals should
Yeah,
not go unremarked on.
right.
And I don't even think that's wrong. You know, a lot of people say, "Oh, you're just anthropomorphizing the animal," and it's like, well, yeah, but if you've had experience with the animal and you know how it behaves,
Right.
then that anthropomorphization is actually the way that you're inevitably going to try and understand its behavior,
Yeah.
because you're going to try and understand it with whatever's closest and you understand the best. And that's us.
Yeah. I mean, it seems reasonable enough to me. I mean, you if you deal with dogs or something like that, for example, it's like you or even rodents, like you get to know, like, okay, this one is clearly different from that one, and not
Mhm.
just because it will or won't eat this sort of thing. Like the reactions are completely different, and you can actually associate, like, in many ways, the way, like, the word person is related to like mask or identity or something like that. Like you can, like, there is personality in the different animals, and so I don't think it's inappropriate the way that Ishmael kind of, they assign names, even of, like, these great characters that they give names to that are just whales. They talk about, oh, this thing is like the Alexander the Great of Wales. It's like it's ridiculous in one sense, but also it's like, well known around the globe. Like that's a famous whale. And if it behaves the same way every time, then it's just like, yeah, there's clearly an identity. Like you can see it and realize, oh, that's the one. So I don't see a problem with that at all. Uh, Let me see. And some of these other ones, I think it was, I don't remember which type of, oh, the mealy mouth porpoise, when he's going through his different categories, that it's this like beautiful black and white um, dolphin essentially, and that it has like this yellow mouth that looks like he's like was just guilty being found eating out of a cookie jar or something like that. So there is kind of that comicalness, or a lot of these animals even have like whiskers that look like mustaches and stuff like that. So it just adds to kind of the absurdity, but it's also not really wrong either. Like you can see a lot of these things, like, oh, like he talks about the last whale that they killed was like a gentleman puffing on a pipe, the way that he was using his blowhole and stuff. And it's just like, well, it's not completely wrong, you know.
Mhm. Yeah, yeah, and yeah, yeah, kind of that last chapter, chapter 76, is the battering ram, talking about the head of the sperm whale,
Mm,
and how, like, basically all of this mass right here is is just, yeah, battering ram. That's the thing he uses. Um and how it's just going to yeah, what yeah, let's get there. Let's get there. Uh, 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 uh. Scrolling down, scrolling down. Now, Mark, this unerringly impelling this dead, impregnable, and inexorable wall, and this most boyish thing within, there swims behind it all a mass of tremendous life, only to be adequately estimated as piled wood is by the cord, and all obedient to one volition as the smallest insect. So that when I shall hereafter detail you all the specialities and concentrations of potency everywhere working in this expansive monster, when I shall show you some of his more inconsiderable braining feats, I trust you will have renounced all ignorant incredulity and be ready to abide by this: that though the sperm whale stove a passage through the isthmus of Darien and mixed the Atlantic with the Pacific, you would not elevate one hair of your eyebrow. For unless you own the whale, you are but a provincial and sentimentalist in truth. But clear truth is a thing for salamander giants only to encounter. How small is the chance for the provincials then? What befell the weakling youth lifting that dread goddess's veil at Laius? So we're just given this impression of this great vitality, this great force in nature that we're really not um, uh, competent to comprehend, and it's got a hint of divinity behind it.
mm. Yeah, I don't really get the reference there to the dread goddess's veil. I don't know if that's related to some sort of like Medusa type thing. I'm probably way off. But I do think it's interesting, this sort of thing of then referring to the reader as provincials and whatnot, and then, as usual, kind of elevating himself to the expert that he can
I
do it.
don't think he's elevating himself.
Is he
He's
not?
elevating the whale. He's
Well,
singing the
okay, yeah,
praises of the whale.
yeah.
So I've got a footnote on that one in my edition. Sais is the Egyptian city in the translated poem "The Veld Statue at Sais" by J.C.F. von Schiller, which tells of a youth devastated by lifting the veil. So I haven't read this poem, but I guess there was a statue of a goddess, and a young man lifted and looked underneath it and went mad.
Yeah. I mean,
Be
there's
ye forewarned that such things can happen.
yeah, and I guess is that also in a sense a little bit of a callback to like the Locke and Kant thing, as well, the sort of thing of like, and also subtilizing your mind. Of it's just like, oh, we're now seeing the perils of attempting to do that. You know, you wind up encountering this this unyielding force that's there, and I like,
And
he details,
intelligence.
yeah.
Right?
Eh,
When I shall show you some of his more inconsiderable braining feats,
mm,
a feat of braining. Oh my gosh, this English man, this English.
yeah. It's really rich. And I think it's funny too. He says, talking about like the hardness of the sperm whale's forehead, that it's as though the forehead of the sperm whale is was paved with horses' hooves. So you have, and it makes me think of like, you have stuff like punching bags and that type of thing, where it's extremely sturdy, also because of its flexibility. It's a lot
Yes,
easier to kind of maintain that. Like, okay, maybe it has some give, and he talks about this bit of like the organ that contains the spermaceti is might actually expand and contract depending on the pressure of the surroundings. And so as it kind of gets out of the water, like it might also kind of become less expanded, and then be able to be a lot better at I guess cleaving a boat in two or something like that, because you still got the force of the bone holding everything together. And then you have this, it's like a you just wrap like leather around a cricket bat or something like that. Like I don't know, it might actually be something that is even more destructive. So if you had something that was just like wooden, like if you crashed a boat into another boat, like that could be really dangerous, because the wood is very brittle and everything. But if it has some give, like it's going to survive that crash.
yeah, yeah.
And
It's
yeah,
that combination of hardness and yielding in the right
yeah,
proportions that makes the oldest trees, like a really durable tree, really tough, because it's like, yeah, it's strong and it'll stand up against gravity, but when the wind blows really hard, it can bend a little.
yeah,
And that's the strongest of everything, right? Like a really good car should have a really good suspension system
mhm,
that'll hold the car upright, but when there's a bump, it'll absorb the force, um,
yeah.
and
You
that's
think
kind of
of,
the goal of things.
yeah, it is kind of like a I don't know, there's a sort of completion in that. Like it's not just perfectly like upright. And so I think of like those earthquake proof buildings that they're on rollers most of the time. And there's different versions of those. Like there's some where the wheels are on its side, and there's other ones where it's actually on like these giant bars that roll. And you can even like in a really severe earthquake, you can actually see the super tall buildings like kind of swaying a little bit. And it's terrifying, but it's also like, oh, that's actually way more stable than the ones that aren't moving. Like
Yeah,
those ones
yeah.
are
The
sustaining
brick
damage.
buildings, the brick buildings are going to get damaged, whereas the steel ones are going to be a little more resistant to that.
Yeah. It's interesting. We were yesterday we were kind of talking about this thing of, you don't find 90-degree angles all that often in nature, but even less so do you find like perfect spheres. Like that type of stuff is extremely rare, but there's this aspect of like you could fit a cube inside of a sphere. You would more or less lose the outward identity of the cube. But by these sort of seemingly imperfections, if your standard is 90-degree angles perfectly, that you actually wind up getting something that is much more complete and maybe simpler to kind of look at. And I think of that like, my power is perfected in weakness sort of thing. And the word weak is connected to what the old word "wike," which means like flexibility or like ability to bend. And so there is that sort of like, oh, there's that's where it's, the strength or the power is perfected in flexibility and malleability. You think of like forging swords or something like that, where it's just like if it's really brittle, like if it can't bend at all. If you ever see like those like competitions where they forge the swords and stuff, that well, they have some, and they're pretty decent. I mean, it's, at the end of the day, every episode's the same thing, but you can see like the flexibility tests. Like sometimes they'll have like a medieval sword or something like that, and they'll have a guy like actually put his foot on the thing and like try to bend it, and you can actually get like these really high quality swords that these forge masters will make, or smiths or what have you, that it can bend and not retain whatever sort of bend you put in it. Like it's not actually going to be bent, but it can take all of that pressure and completely like twist and curve and then come right back out and be perfectly fine. Whereas if it was like a cheaply made brittle thing, then it would just snap.
Yeah. And that's the strength we see in the sperm whales and probably entirely in Moby Dick.
Yeah.
When we finally do get to see him face to face.
Yeah. In 3 or 4 months.
In 3 or 4 months.
I'm fine with that. I'm loving it.
We're cooking, we're over halfway there.
60%.
We're over halfway there. Yeah.
Yeah.
We'll just keep on cooking along.
I'm here.
Anybody who might be listening, you can join the Discord server with the link down below. But once again, Castle, thanks for showing up
Thank
and giving me somebody to talk to this magnificent book with.
Always a pleasure.
All righty. Take care and God bless.
You too. Thank you.